Welcome to the Leaders Who Last podcast. Real talk, real leaders. We hit on strategy, people, and health, where sustainable performance lives. Each episode brings honest conversations, research-based insights, and practical tools to help you lead well and long in a complex world that is not slowing down. Here are your co-hosts, Mary Axelson, leadership strategist and transformation expert, and founder and CEO of WeMax Consulting, where she helps dynamic organizations and leaders reach their fullest potential. And Dr. Kristin Tugman, CEO of Tugman Consulting and a leading expert in disability psychology and return to work strategy. For more than 2 decades, she's helped organizations reduce absence, strengthen well-being, and create cultures where people can thrive. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to the Leaders Who Last podcast. Real leaders, real talk. We hit on strategy, people, and health where sustainable performance lives. I am your co-host, Mary Axelson, joined with...
And I'm Kristin Tugman.
And today we are talking about lead like a human, not a hero. Heroic 24/7 leadership burns out executives and hits women leaders especially hard. We will examine the always on, fix it yourself pattern and why it hits women leaders differently, with higher expectations and harder judgments for showing any limits. We dive into what's driving this expectation, why it is causing burnout at an accelerated pace, explore the hero tax organizations and people are experiencing, and transition to healthier ways to lead. We will also end with one strategy move, one health check-in, and one power sharing action that you can try immediately. So, Kristin, the data doesn't lie. Walk us through the data that we're seeing and how it is impacting people and organizations.
And you are so right that data does not lie. What's interesting is we talk about, $150 billion spent in presenteeism annually, which is a huge number, but I think too often employers don't really think about it as it's 150 billion and some piece of that is part of my pie. So, and when I think about hero culture, it's one of my favorite conversations actually, because I think is really what modern corporate America was founded upon. Right. So I'm an IO psychologist and we started talking about this like in the 1990s, 2000s hero culture. It took a long time to put a label on it. But if you think all the way back, like think about the multi-generational workforce and how we're 100% influenced by what came before us. And so the traditionalists, right? So, bear with me for a moment as I go back to the 1930s and the New Deal, right? Where really FDR born a middle class. And so then the baby boomers came right after the traditionalists and they learned that if they worked really hard, they could achieve the American dream. But there was a different dynamic, right, in the traditionalist society into the baby boomer society where there weren't as many women in the workforce. And so you could be a workaholic and people wore that like a badge of honor, where men were working 80 hours a week and women were home taking care of the kids. So we haven't evolved past that. And one of my favorite stories, honestly, is I started doing this work, really trying to understand how do we align with the whole Gallup components of how we thrive, right? Like what is our purpose? How do we have social health, mental health, physical health, and financial health? And I started to align principles within the workforce to those concepts. And what I found was that we were in a place of continuing down this path of hero culture where General Motors, for example, right, one of the founding fathers of corporate America, their executives always historically wore working 80 hours a week as a badge of honor. That's just what you did. And if you couldn't do that, then, you couldn't keep up. And so they thought as we were sort of evolving, that they allowed 2 women who, they were proud of themselves for integrating women into their workforce and into the executive space. 2 women coming back from maternity leave. They said they could job share. Each of those women worked 40 hours a week. Come on. That just doesn't even make any sense. And they were proud of that. And so we've not evolved past that. We continue to battle it. We've made some progress. We take 2 steps back. And so, you think about the numbers, right? And I always say that the reckoning for corporate America is a long time coming because employee engagement has been at 35% for years and years. And it has hovered 35%, 34%. Right now it's 31%. It's at an all-time low. And so, I threw out the 150 billion annually, right? But Let's break that down for your average employer who has 10,000 employees. So what the data tells us is that for a 10,000 employee group, presenteeism costs you about $2,000 per employee per year. Okay. Then that leads to absenteeism, which then in addition costs you, so people being away from work, unable to work due to having to take leave due to some sort of illness or injury. That's $1,685 per employee per year. And then Sherm talks to us about, as a result of that, there's hiring and training and replacement costs because we end up with attrition as a result of those two things. And that's about 50% to 200% of average salary. And so let's just be conservative and say we'll do 100% of salary at about $50,000, which is extremely conservative. For your average employer that has 10,000 employees, that's going to cost
Wow.
you $52 million a
No.
year. I mean, can you afford that?
And it's interesting when you and I were prepping for this talk, I was thinking about myself and where have I sat? Where do I sit as far as this hero mentality is concerned with leadership? And I remember back when I was in corporate, I was on the phone with my husband. I was traveling, and he said to me, "I don't feel like I'm married anymore." And he goes, "It's not about whether you're physically here or not." He goes, "Because regardless, I don't feel like you're here." And that was a real hit for me because here's one of the people that I love the most in the world telling that he doesn't feel my presence anymore. And it's because I had signed up for this hero mentality that we're talking about. And I was putting work and going above and beyond, raising the bar above the people that I love the most.
100%.
So you have a real reality gap going on between what is expected from us in corporate America or in organizations versus what we need as human beings to be sustainable.
I mean, I can completely relate to that. Whenever somebody talks about being present, it takes me all the way back to walking in a parking garage with a really important boss mentor of mine. And I remember saying to him, because we were traveling all the time, I remember just saying to him, do you ever feel like your family is mad at you? And he goes, what do you mean? And he goes, I hope not. I said, because of all the work we do. We work a lot of hours and you're not home as much. And he said, I do the best I can. He goes, but the one piece of advice I'll give to you is be present. And we changed the subject and that was it. And it was like, I don't know, 5-6 years later, I was sitting on the couch realizing my laptop in my lap, right? This is 8 o'clock at night and it's sitting in between my family. My daughter was about 10 years old and we're watching Hannah Montana. And I realized in that moment, I wasn't present. She was talking my ear off about the episode. I wasn't really hearing her. But then I realized I wasn't present at work because I was angry and I wasn't present at home. And I realized at that moment I had to make a change. And I've never forgotten that moment. And that's really shaped how I set my boundaries going forward.
Yeah. So Sherm did a study, global workforce study on culture. What they found is that 82% of executives rated their culture favorably. Only 47% of employees agree. So last week we talked about the misalignment tax, right? And that's where we have a misalignment between the strategy, the people, and the structure, right? Puts extra drag on the workforce because people are trying to figure out the direction, who's responsible for what, maybe problem solving for things that are not even really the problem, and contributes to up to a loss of 40% in profits. Now, we also have a hero tax. And a hero tax on top of your misalignment tax, where we reward people for showing up and being heroes, which creates extra emotional and mental load. And it's also when people get admiration because they're meeting these higher expectations, yet we don't actually give them the resources, the money, the accountability to be able to live up to these higher expectations. But what they do is they come in and they save the day, and we're all grateful for those heroics. It becomes the definition of exceeds expectations, and it gets built into our performance management and our compensation systems. So the other thing that happens is that when I consistently show up as this reliable fixer, now this becomes my norm. as far as what you expect from me in my performance. So my previous, maybe I was a previous exceeds expectation, but now I'm just meeting expectations because you know that that's what you can expect from me. So my higher compensation that I got when I was exceeds, right? Because in organizations, we base comp decisions based on your performance rating, right?
Yep.
Paying for performance.
Yep.
Now I'm dropped down to a meets, which impacts my compensation. So what does that mean? Now I have to do even more when I was already doing more so that I can get myself back up to that higher expectations. And then
Overwhelming.
it is overwhelming and it's not sustainable. It's unhealthy, right? And I think
Mhm.
when we start talking about setting boundaries, having reasonable workloads, doing capacity planning, that sometimes we then translate that to we're just expecting mediocre performance. And it's like,
Mm.
no, we're not. We still want outstanding results, but we want to do it in a way that's healthy and sustainable. Because the other thing that we do is that if you do set limits, then you're frowned upon, and that potentially affects your potential and whether you're going to be promoted into higher level positions. So we have this real implicit voice that's going through our organizations that is telling us that we have to be this heroic leader if we actually want to be able to grow and progress in our organizations. And then on top of that, right, we take these heroic individual contributors who are doing extremely well in their job. We take that as potential for leadership. We put you in a leadership role, yet we don't give you any training or support or
Mm-mm.
mentorship around how do you make that transition from being a strong individual contributor to now a high performing leader. So I keep on doing it myself. I'm not delegating. Okay? And I'm getting rewarded. I'm continuing to get rewarded for personally delivering results
Mhm.
versus being rewarded for delegating and developing and mentoring my employees so that they have the opportunity to grow and progress in the organization. So all we do is we take these superhuman, high performing individual contributors, we put them into leadership roles. They progress in their leadership roles. They bring that mentality with them. And then we have this compound effect that's
Mhm.
happening where I'm now, no matter where I am in the organization, no matter where I sit, I'm expected to be in the weeds, doing the work, myself, continuing
Mhm.
to rescue and save the project and be those heroes.
100%. And it actually reminds me of, so when you think about what you've just described is very indicative of psychological safety, right?
Mm,
So there's no chance for anyone to raise their hand and say, this is too much, or I need something, or I'm stressed, or this isn't working. And when I was at one of my other corporate jobs, we did some research. I actually had implemented a really effective behavioral health case management strategy within a claims organization. And the claims organization came back to me and said, this is great. This is working really well. But when are we going to tell employers that they have to stop abusing their employees? I was like,
mm,
"Oh, hey, that's a really good question." I mean, that's part of the work I do, so let's talk about that. So we decided we were gonna do a study. So we really wanted to understand sort of, everything runs on data, right? So we had a group of employers that they had a lot of mental health claims and the durations were really short. And then we had a group of employers who had really low mental health claims, disability claims I'm talking about, but their durations are really long. So we're like, what's the difference and what policies and practices are in place? And so we couldn't get at it with the actual data. So we did a qualitative study with the HR teams. And what the HR teams told us was the ones that were a lot of mental health claims, short duration, high performing organization, right? A lot of heroism happening. And they said they were so driven by productivity standards that when somebody faltered, they immediately said, you know what? Just go out on disability. We can't have this. Right.
yeah.
Just go out on disability. It's okay. And so they thought that that was positive because there's no stigma relative to disability, but just go out on disability versus trying to look at our culture. And so those folks went out a lot and they came back. But then the other one, we thought, okay, what are they doing right? And it turned out the heroism there was people felt like they were constantly being evaluated based on how many hours they were putting in, how much they were being
Mm,
seen, how much just tactical output they were able to produce. And they were afraid to say that they weren't doing well. They didn't feel like they could raise their hand. And so when those folks went out, they stayed out for a really long time. And
mm,
so both, it was kind of depressing to be honest, because we realized there weren't any best practices to learn from. And so, we said, okay, well, we've got to look at putting programs in place for both of these types of environments. And it's really the consistency is this sort of hero mentality. But at the same time, to your point around just taking technical experts who do a really good job, who are heroes in their individual contributor role and moving them into the manager role is also part of the issue because management is a two-pronged approach, right? You got to know your stuff, but you also have to be good people leaders. Like you have to
mhm.
care about your people. You have to understand how to motivate your people, how to take care of their well-being. And so we did this study and we were actually had the opportunity to present it among about 300 and almost 400 HR professionals. And we said to them, just a quick polling question, your managers are technical experts, skilled in people management, or both? And 89% of them out of 400 said technical experts. And so
Mhm.
that's a huge issue. So we just continue to perpetuate this heroism where we're creating an environment for unsustainable expectations that lead to burnout and, frankly, mental health conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And the companies that are going to thrive are the ones that are future ready and see this problem. And so I have a
Yes,
client that I'm working with right now. They've experienced an incredible amount of growth in a short period of time. They recognize that their infrastructure hasn't kept up with their growth. They actually called out the fact that they have heroics going on in their company both at
that's
an
amazing.
individual contributor as well as a leadership level. And
Hmm.
so I'm partnering with them right now on building out a learning and development framework where one of the problems that we're solving for is reducing heroics. So it's the kind of organizations like that who are saying, no, we're not going to burn our people out. We're not going to reward heroic behavior. We're actually going to put a structure, framework, process, and tools in place so that we have the operational excellence that we need and that we're not overtaxing our people to be able to get the job done. And then we're also allowing others to be able to grow and develop within their role as individual contributors, and then also having a meaningful process in place about what is leadership, what does that look like for us, and how are we ensuring that either our employees are growing into the roles that way or our leaders are showing up that way. So let's transition to gendered expectations, Kristen, and what's happening with women right now, and why or has been happening and continues to happen, and why we need to think about it a little differently when we're thinking about female leaders. So I want to talk about the glass cliff, but before I do that,
Mm.
why don't you hit on people pleaser?
Yeah, people pleasers. I think it's a sociological complex, not to get too complicated on us, but it is inherent in our social structure that women are going to be people pleasers, right?
Mm,
And so let's be clear, and it may not be a popular opinion, but generally men are intimidated by strong women. Generally men find strong women offensive. That's just the nature of our
mhm,
society.
mhm,
And I think the reason, as I sort of dig into this whole equity issue that plagues our society, frankly, is because men and women have a very different definition of strength. And so when you look at society and sociological expectations for women, right, women are expected to be helpful, nice. They're expected to be caregivers, accommodating, and not say no. And
mhm,
so for us as women, we don't necessarily consider that to be a sign of strength. We consider that to be sort of a societal expectation that we're battling, right? Ongoing. Men see
mhm,
that as a sign of strength. And so when we as women feel overwhelmed or we feel like we need to say no, or we feel like we need to push back, we suddenly become difficult and we're not team players. And this is where that ridiculous phrase, "you should smile more," came from. I don't know if there's anything that makes me more angry than somebody telling me to smile or telling my daughter to smile. And so that's really, I think, the big rub. And so women are considered strong when they take everything on. They say yes. I don't think it's innate in that we are people pleasers. I think we were taught to be people pleasers. But yes, women have a propensity toward empathy. So we do feel more when we do have to say no. So coupled with that societal expectation, it's really hard to say no. And then you pile the hero complex on top of it within the corporate space, and you really sort of have a recipe for disaster for women feeling like they have to take on more and more and more and they can't say no, and then they just feel bad about not being able to quote handle it. And I think if I look back at my corporate career, I think the biggest mistake I've made is just handling it in so many different definitions of the word handle it. And we will not see equity, I don't think, until we get to a place where we, as women, realize that we don't just have to handle it. And we do realize that there's a point at which it's too much and that it's okay to say, hey, it's too much. In fact, this summer, I obviously I coach this stuff and so do you. And so, you and I, right, we try to stay as self-aware as we possibly can and practice what we preach. But even for us, right, it's so hard. I try to set boundaries. And I realize that so many times in both my work and personal life, I just try to say, yes, like I do want to be there for everybody and do
Sure.
things and be present. And I actually, this summer, I said no twice. I actually finally said, guess what? It's too much, and it was just, I had a lot of work stuff going on, had immediate family, like my daughter was moving and we were actually going on vacation, God forbid, right? And I actually had two sets of family say, we're doing this and we'd love for you to come. And both times I actually just had to say, it's too much. And guess what? The family said, we get it. That's okay. You're allowed to say it's too much. And so we've got to get ourselves to a place where we as women sort of band together and decide that it's okay for us to say it's too much and to start to change that sociological expectation, in my opinion.
Yeah. I love that you're bringing up the too much because I have been told my whole life, as well as a lot of women in my life, to include you, that we're too much.
Mm.
And I really struggled with that for a long time. And I felt guilt and shame around that. Like, what was I doing wrong that I was
Mhm.
being perceived that I was too much? And so what I was really being told is to play down in other situations because others were feeling uncomfortable with me stepping into my voice, sharing my opinion
Mhm.
and navigating through the masculine energy that I experience sometimes. And like I said, my friends and my colleagues as well. So I thought to myself, am I really too much? Or is it that you're not enough? Why do
Ooh, I
I
love that.
have to play
Yeah.
down? Because you feel uncomfortable. It's not
Mhm.
my problem that you can't keep up. It's not my problem that you
Yeah.
feel uncomfortable. So, hot take right here.
Right?
Too much can be sometimes too much, and it is okay to set boundaries and take care of yourself and ask for what you need. And sometimes too much does not mean that you need to play down because somebody else is feeling uncomfortable. You just think, I'm okay with being
Mhm.
too much. You just figure out how to keep up with me. And so it leads to, we talk a lot about the glass ceiling and we also have the glass cliff where
'Kay.
women are often put into a high stake crisis situation to prove their performance and their potential. It happens to women disproportionately more than men. And if we win, great, we solve the problem, we get the big hero tag and we get to progress. But if we don't, the consequence and the penalties associated with that are much higher. There's a lot of
Mhm.
research and data out there around when male CEOs fail in organizations, there's really minimal impact to them. They just go on to another company and on to be a
Yep.
CEO someplace else. we have a higher tolerance and acceptance level for incompetence. Whereas when women, that happens for us, it can really wreck our career and be incredibly hard for us to rebound. So there's a double-edged sword to, being that hero and the penalties and the consequences associated with it. So why don't we transition into start talking about some solutions, right? How do you move from having a heroism, leadership, mindset, and culture to start having a whole person leadership and organization success, right? Because the other thing, and you hit on this a little bit, is that within our generations, there's different expectations on it. So your baby boomers, if they're going to show up and be okay, with that all in 24/7 work mindset, where the generations that are coming into the workforce in their 20s and their 30s, they are going to have a whole person mindset. So they
100%.
are going to look for personal fulfillment and
Hmm.
professional excellence. They are not going to personally compromise themselves at work. That it then impacts them as far as their whole lives are concerned. So you really have to have alignment around well-being, purpose, direction across the board. And during the pandemic, we saw a skill set escalate to the top, and that is called compassion, right? That great leaders are compassionate. They're genuinely invested in their teams and their well-being and their communities. They demonstrate empathy and active thinking, and active listening, and they foster authentic relationships. When you think about women right now in the workforce, one of the things that is happening is that 74% of single women and households with children are financially struggling right now.
Hmm.
And so that is 3/4 of your workforce. And so having conversations with them around, around housing and daycare, and how can we have more flexibility with your schedule as long as you're delivering those outcomes. That's just a simple example of how you can show up as a whole person, a human-centered leadership, driving a more inclusive mindset so that you can get that productivity and you get that health that you're looking for. Hey, what's the solution that you have, Kristen?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it from a health and productivity and holistic well-being perspective. And so I kind of think about it in four pillars as we think about how do we maximize productivity, right, and minimize absence. So
Mm.
pre having anybody with a health or a mental health condition, we've got to have an environment that empowers employees to be productive through policy, through benefit solutions, to really bring their whole self to work and be productive. And so what that means is, right, you want to have attendance policies that allow people to feel like they can manage their daily lives. You as an employer understand that, hey, your kids get sick, or you might have a caregiving obligation, or you might have to actually go to the doctor. Oh, and then by the way, you want to have benefit plans that empower employees to take care of their health. So if you've got a high deductible health plan, right? Those in the health and productivity space have been sort of the norm. But what happens is a lot of times employees feel like they can't afford to go to the doctor because of their deductible. And then they have an attendance policy that means that they're going to get penalized if they should take care of their health. So we've got to align our policies and practices with, again, empowering employees to maintain their health and be productive. At the same time, we have to make sure that managers have the people skills to recognize when somebody is struggling so that they don't just jump to the conclusion it's a performance issue, that they talk to their employees, that they know their employees. That you talked about Gen Z coming into the workforce. Gen Z told me in the recent study I did that they expect their manager to actually know them well enough to know the current behavior is not like them. Like, what a concept that managers would go, geez, you missing a deadline is not like you. Is there anything I can do to help? And then we are going to have absence. We're going to have the need for leave. And we want to have policies and practices in place that keep employees engaged in a healthy way and keep them feeling connected. And then we want to have return to work programs when somebody should go out and that allow them to feel prepared to return so that we create this sort of system of employees that feel engaged, that feel like they have compassionate leadership, that lead to them wanting to stay with you as an employer take care of their health and come back should they experience a disabling event. I think, and so all of that sort of leads to psychological safety and is going to maximize your output relative to your bottom line. And so when you think about data, right, let's get back to data. What you want to do is make sure that you have baseline information around your engagement scores. There's a really great set of presenteeism surveys, one called the Work Life Questionnaire that I highly recommend. It's easy to incorporate into your employee surveys, your engagement surveys, that will give you a baseline of how present are people at work. And again, presenteeism means you are at work, yet you're not really working because you're thinking about other things or concerned about other things. And then what are your absenteeism rates? How many people are out on a given day for leave? And what's your incidence like for disability and your durations? And then certainly what's your turnover and attrition? If you as an employer really look at this holistically and think about how to implement a psychologically safe workplace, the other nugget I want to give you is that, hey, guess what? This is going to have a positive impact on your healthcare spend. And I know that is something that employers are panicked about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when we're seeing 30% plus, right, increases in overall
100%.
healthcare. The other thing that I was just thinking about too, when you were talking about tenure, a really good indicator around your workforce and your culture and what's happening if employees feel supported is look at where you're seeing the most turnover happen. And if you're seeing turnover happening within that first 12 months, that's a very high indicator that you do not have the right type of onboarding support in place, nor do you have the type of culture that you're aiming to. So even if you just look at one indicator, that's an easy one for you to take a look at. Kristin, I have a question for you. Back on the unlimited PTO, right? So we see a lot of organizations
Oh, yeah.
transitioning to unlimited PTO. We're saying, oh, we trust our employees. We believe that they'll be responsible in how they're taking their time off. So it becomes a real positive pitch, right, as far as employee experience is concerned. So I've also heard another pitch that it actually does the opposite, and it actually ends up with employees taking less time off, and there's nobody overseeing or managing it from a health, perspective. And then because companies offer unlimited, they don't have to actually put it on the books as far as accounting is concerned, and so it helps from a fiscal situation. So what do you think about that? Is unlimited PTO the way to go, or is it actually undermining what we're talking about?
It depends on culture, right? So most companies that I've found that have implemented unlimited PTO have a hero culture. And so there's guilt associated with taking PTO. And so generally what you find is that employees feel like they can't actually take their PTO. I find that I don't think I don't think corporate America is ready for unlimited PTO because the culture hasn't advanced enough to empower employees to do things like they do in Europe, which is take 2 weeks off, and that's just the norm. I think I took 2 weeks off. I think I was in corporate America for 23 years before I took 2 weeks off in a row, and that's just the nature of our culture. So what I find to be most effective is give people enough PTO so that they feel like they have flexibility and they get to take time away, but at the same time, you have to encourage them to use it. So there's an organization I work with that actually the second you log in, it will tell you the last time you took PTO and how much you have left and encourage you to take it. So just little nudges like that, I think go a long way to create a culture that encourages, hey, it's okay to take time away and we don't want you to get burned out. But I haven't seen any I haven't seen any good success stories with unlimited PTO as much as it sounds awesome. I personally have unlimited PTO now that I'm a consultant. And so I'm a pretty good boss. So I kind of just let myself do what I think I need. But unless you're kind of a one woman show, I'm not sure that unlimited PTO is the way to go at this point.
Another good practice is to have conversations with your employees right at the beginning of the year and say, okay, based upon the amount of PTO you have, let's start having some conversations proactively about when you can take time off, especially when you have high turn, high burn. periods of time in your company, and we need that rest afterwards. I actually plot out all my time off at the beginning of the year because I'm really bad. If I don't do that, I'll get through a whole year. I mean, there was one time where I was in October and I hadn't taken any time off.
Wow.
And I told myself I was never going to do that again. Now, whether I actually end up executing on what I've plotted out, I got a better chance that I'm actually going to be able to do that if I have the foresight and think about it. All right, so let's move into our
Yeah.
quick tips. I'm going to give you a real fast and easy strategy move. Look at your performance. Whatever you comment on, whatever you measure, that is what you care about. That is what your employees care about. And that is what defines your culture. So I encourage you to look for some low stake situations. Take one or two of your heroes and ask them to coach and mentor somebody else on the team where they're transferring their experience and their knowledge, and then put those employees that transfer is happening with in those low stake situations so that you can start to organically create experimentation will then incrementally lead you to redefining performance once you've got some reps under your belt.
Excellent. So here's my health check. So building off last time, I want to continue down the mindfulness path, right? So last time I asked you to make sure that you are taking at least 4 times 15 seconds out of the day to do a quick mindfulness check. Deep breath, right? Understand where you are. And this time, I always get pushback, especially from women, about saying no. But what we realize too is that when you are continually taking more on, it does build up and it starts to push us toward burnout. And it, as much as you might not believe it, it builds up in your body and it builds up in your tension. And so when you're doing your mindfulness checks this week, when you have to say yes to something that you really didn't necessarily want to say yes to, yet you felt obligated to, I want you to sit with that, take some deep breaths, and just feel where that lives in your body. Is it in your shoulders? Is it in your stomach? Really feel what that means to say yes. And maybe we can get us to a place where we start to understand the consequences of that yes.
I really love that because I know you and I both have aura rings.
We do.
And sometimes I don't know that I'm in a high stress mode. And my aura ring actually sends me a message.
I love that.
Yeah.
Like you are
And
experiencing a high level of stress today.
gee, Barry, you've been sitting for a long time. Is it time to stretch your legs? So I love those. I love those little prompts, especially when we're dealing with really intense days. So let's share a power sharing moment. And how do we get out of the heroics and start sharing our power and our responsibility? And I have an example, a really great example of a client that I recently worked with. We were building out their strategic direction, looking 2 to 3 years out. And previously, the prior leader had a practice of building out the company's strategy in a vacuum. So she would do that on her own. She would select a few members of the team to help her with it, and then it would get delivered to the team. And then there was also no clear accountability around how that got cascaded down into the organization. So really, tying back to that misalignment tax that we were talking about, and then also positioning certain people to be the heroes to execute on the plan. So new president comes in, we work with her. Her whole executive team was a part of developing the plan. We had several meetings so that we could look at it from an interdependency perspective because we're cross-functional. Nobody gets it done all by themselves. So we had to make sure that whatever we were establishing for goals, that the whole team had capacity to be able to support it. And then what they did is they brought it to their teams and walked their teams through the strategy, got their feedback, and made adjustments to it. So by the time we got done with the plan, it felt very empowering. People felt accountable and in a really good position to be able to support each other.
So, yeah, this is a great discussion.
See you next time.